So the question was, what was the process of dropping out of Stanford when I was 19 like, and what kind of advice did I get? Interestingly, it was a fairly binary decision. I got to a point where I actually originally did not intend to drop out of Stanford, but I wasn't going to any classes, and I was spending all of my time talking to VCs. The question was, as a 19-year-old, how do you go about the process of convincing people that you know what you're doing and that you can pull it off? I think the first piece is realizing that it's not necessarily about age. And people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and the Google guys and Michael Dell and Larry Ellison and others have demonstrated that.
This is Elisabeth Holms, born on February 3rd, 1984 in Washington, D.C. She grew up in a well-off family who all believed Elisabeth was something special, that she would become someone great. The mother worked as a member of Congress. The father worked for the State Department as a lawyer for human rights. Elisabeth had a lot of admiration for her father and his work as a human rights supporter. The family moved to Houston. After that, she applied for Stanford College in California, right in the middle of Silicon Valley. She, however, dropped out of college. She lived in the basement of her fellow classmates at the time and started working on her idea of a blood testing patch. She pitched the idea to her former professor, Phyllis Gardner, professor of medicine, who mostly discarded the idea as not viable. That didn't stop her to file for patent, one of many, but she still needed some cash, and then she turned to a family friend. With this funding, everything was possible, and in 2004 she had a new idea. A drop of blood could test for anything you needed, and her company was started. Theranos was founded in 2003 and was a privately held corporation, and the board constituted of Miss Holmes, George Schultz, and Ramesh Balwani, who was the president. It was a play on words from therapy and diagnosis.
An extraordinary communicator, and I want to show a clip we have from the TED talk that you did, I don't know, 9 months ago. Yeah. Let's just take a look at this clip and then talk about it. Could we play the clip, please?
We've made it possible to run comprehensive laboratory tests from a tiny sample or a few drops of blood that could be taken from a finger.
It's rather evident from people hearing her speak that that voice was animated.
And we've made it possible to eliminate the tubes and tubes of blood that traditionally have to be drawn from an arm and replaced it with the nanotainer.
So we have made it possible to do comprehensive lab tests from a prick from the finger and to eliminate the tubes and tubes of blood.
Yeah.
In retrospect, when you look at where you are today, one test with the prick of blood, wasn't that going too far?
So we have developed hundreds of tests over the course of the last 12 years that can run a tiny sample using proprietary Theranos technology. And I have...
And by the way, it's not just me that was focused on the one test. That was sort of the story. The Theranos story was all about this one pinprick that would let you do comprehensive blood testing. Yeah. That was the story.
Yeah, well, I think this is what collect our samples, right? This has nothing to do with our tests.
Now you're confusing me. How many tests are you doing right now from a simple pinprick as you described in that TED Talk?
Yeah, so right now, just because of this FDA transition, we're only doing one.
Okay.
Right?
Theranos board member George Schultz wanted his grandson Tyler Schultz to work for the prominent company. Tyler, who just graduated, was fresh from school and eager to start working for Theranos. However, Tyler started having a lot of suspicions on how things were run. Despite his young age and fairly limited experience, he found that things wasn't adding up, and he decided to raise the alarm with his grandfather after trying to talk to Miss Holmes numerous times. Tyler saw no way out of this than leave the company. Other employees said the environment felt toxic and most were afraid to speak up due to the elaborate NDAs they had to sign prior, plus the aggressive in-house lawyer. The seemingly well-spoken Elisabeth had numerous TV appearances where she spoke about this outstanding new way to test blood. On some instances, TV personalities and profiles was invited to test the pinprick invention while eagerly waiting for their results. The truth was, each of these investor pledges or PR stunts was performed by sending the blood sample from the pinprick to actual blood work laboratories using traditional methods. To be able to analyze that small amount of blood, the staff at Theranos had to dilute the blood sample before sending it in. The truth was, none of these results reporters or investigators got from the blood test was by the Theranos technology. It was all outsourced, and it was all a lie.
With the hope of using small amounts of blood, just a few drops, to do what normally took numerous tubes.
Now, most of us have had our blood drawn at some point or another in our lives, but how much do you really know about what happens after the blood leaves your body?
Testing blood may seem like a simple process, but in fact there are numerous steps that can impact the results. For example, the tourniquet. How long's that supposed to be on? Was that alcohol or iodine used to clean my arm? What's the size of the needle? And why are there so many tubes? The anti-clotting medicine is not standardized, nor are the various reagents used to do the testing itself, let alone the machines that finally spit out the results. It is a big $75 billion industry with thousands of players controlling little pieces of the process. Theranos wants all of it.
Okay.
What resulted is this black box, a mini lab. The company says it can run up to 40 different tests on a tiny sample of blood.
We've designed it to allow for the same operations that a technologist could do in a laboratory.
Holmes believes that a finger stick, instead of a needle, will make people more likely to get their blood tested.
I'm going to do this myself. Tiffany, hello. That's still a needle in there.
Lancet.
A lancet, okay.
Needle has a hole. Lancet is a poke.
For what it's worth, this Theranos blood test put my cholesterol at 170. My own doctor found it to be 169 just the week before. Holmes says she wants to make this sort of testing available anywhere, anytime.
There's no reason why these can't be distributed in very, very decentralized locations.
Your home?
Yeah.
You think people's homes should have these, essentially a clinical laboratory in their own house?
I think that's a very interesting space.
But wherever the tests occur, the results need to be precise and accurate. And that's where the story of Theranos starts to crumble.
There were several labs that were tested that weren't totally accurate.
One study in the Journal of Clinical Investigation found the tests from Theranos retail testing sites in Phoenix, Arizona to have significant discrepancies. But even more damaging, an assessment from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services of their Newark, California lab, which questioned Theranos' ability to run a clinical laboratory, citing, quote, a global and long-term failure of the quality control program, and demanding they get their act together. Wall Street Journal investigative reporter John Carreyrou first broke that story last October.
Theranos wasn't able to do so to the agency's satisfaction, so the agency has now decided it's going to shut that lab down, and it's going to ban Elisabeth Holms from the blood testing industry for at least 2 years.
Holmes has until September 5th to appeal, but in her first interview since the CMS decision, she insists the technology was never to fault for the erroneous results. Instead, she blames it on flawed operations and personnel.
At the highest level, we didn't have the right leadership in the laboratory, and we didn't have the implementation of the quality system in terms of procedures and the associated documentation to ensure that we were realizing the quality standards that we hold ourselves to.
Of course, in the middle of all this are patients whose health depended on Theranos for accurate results.
There's this man who goes by the initials RC right now in Arizona, who is suggesting that the lab results that he got from Theranos were not accurate, and it led to him having a heart attack. Based on what you know, is it possible that what he's saying is true? Could he have gotten a lab result that was so askew that he didn't act on it, and then a month later he ended up having a heart attack?
I'm not the lab director, and so...
I know, but you're the CEO and founder of the company. I mean, this is as serious as it gets.
What I know is that I've put the best people in place to be able to investigate every aspect of this and ensure that we meet the quality standards that we hold ourselves to, and I know they're doing that.
The biggest problem was going live with blood tests that didn't work or that worked only part of the time.
Theranos is under the microscope of the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Securities and Exchange Commission about whether it misled investors about its technology.
I'm a doctor, I'm a scientist. It takes me some time to understand all that you are talking about. I'm not sure that I frankly still understand all of it. The people who are putting in tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars fully understand Theranos.
They understood the, I'm trying to think of the best way to answer that, the reasons they invested in the first place, right? These are sophisticated investors who chose to come into a startup company based on our intellectual property, based on our patent portfolio, based on our mission, based on the people who were here, based on what we were working to do, right?
One of the headlines was $9 billion company down to zero. First of all, is that accurate?
No. But the headlines are not always accurate, as you know.
But when you read stuff like that, though,
yeah.
I mean, what do you think? And your investors and your board members are reading those same things.
Those articles were focused on me personally, and I did not start this company because I was interested in or worried about, that.
But for now, Holmes and Theranos are hell-bent on gaining back the significantly eroded public trust and proving the product they have to offer is the real deal.
It's probably the most important question I think anybody who's watching has about this. Does it work?
Yes.
You're confident in that?
I am confident in that. Yeah.
Dr. Sanjay Gupta, CNN, Palo Alto, California.
I'm really excited to...
In 2015, medical research professor John Carreyrou started raising some questions about the practices claimed by Theranos. Together with investigating journalist John Carreyrou from the Wall Street Journal, they started looking into the technology and its grand claims by the company with Elisabeth in front. Just like the Emperor's new clothes, Elisabeth's blood test revolution was only visible to those who believed and bought the hype. From the outside, many critical views arose, not only how the technology performed, but whether it was even possible. It eventually led to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, together with some investors, sued the Theranos company in 2016. The lawsuits would last for about 2 years, and in 2018, the company was dissolved. In March 2018, Elisabeth Holms and Ramesh Balwani were charged with fraud and conspiracy charges. As the claims and critiques hailed, Elisabeth was adamant in stating the technology performed as expected. The problem here, especially about the question of fraud, is not whether she wanted to make it a success. Unlike a Ponzi scheme, which only served to fool investors and paying them small slices funded by newer investors, she actually spent money on the company and towards the production of the nanoglass units and such. However, the fraud comes to play when she deliberately lied to investors, to the media, and to the FDA by claiming a technology that simply did not exist year after year. I think her intention was that it somehow would be made in a satisfactory way, but what a responsible company would do is call for a press conference saying it hasn't performed as desired and that further development is needed. By purposely lying time after time, Elisabeth and Rashwan did fraud not only investors but also partner companies and their patients.
Would it concern you that a number of tests weren't working on Theranos' devices? Was Theranos' technology deployed in emergency rooms, hospitals, and provider offices?
No.
Was a Theranos manufactured device ever deployed in the battlefield?
No.
Was it ever deployed in a medevac helicopter?
No.
The statement that Theranos currently offers more than 200 and is ramping up to offer more than 1,000 of the most commonly ordered blood diagnostic tests, all without the need for syringes. Was that statement correct?
Reading it now, I don't think it is.
Elisabeth wasn't all about the money, I think. She was about the recognition. I think she thought of herself as a wonder child, the new Zuckerberg or Jobs, and got a lot of attention for it.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth, I have to tell you, in all my years, I can't recall a private company that I have to candidly, many have never heard of, getting this kind of attention and scrutiny. What do you think's going on here?
This is what happens when you work to change things. And first they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world. And I have to say, I personally was shocked to see that the Journal would publish something like this when we had sent them over 1,000 pages of documentation demonstrating that the statements in their piece were false. But we're doing things differently, and we're working to make a difference, and that means people raise questions, and that's okay. But in this case, it was pretty disappointing to see that after every single one of the sources that we spoke with, who the Journal had contacted, told us that the statements that were being attributed to them were false or misleading, and the only sources who were left were ones who wouldn't speak with us, who on their own website say that they now do business with LabCorp in their office, or in the other case, demanded in writing that we pay them in cash upfront $2,500 for an hour to talk to them about their statements to the Journal.
Did the Journal
those
know
things
what you
weren't
just
referenced.
said? Did the Journal know everything that you just said before they wrote the article?
Of course, absolutely.
Oh, okay. At the same time, pretty negative article, so let me ask you, I know that you've talked to us about your partnership with Walgreens, one of the best retailers out there, great drugstore chain, Cleveland Clinic, one of obviously the most admired health care facilities. Did either call you today and say, you know what, we got to rethink our relationship?
Absolutely not. We're incredibly blessed to have partners who have worked with us, have actually seen our technology, and unfortunately in this case we offered to bring our technology to the Journal offices to show them the technology they were questioning running firsthand, and they denied that request to show it to them. But Cleveland Clinic, Walgreens, so many of the other partners that we have seen our technology, they've worked with us, they've used our systems, and they understand what we're doing, and they understand that when you try to change things.
I believe the attention she got was way too valuable for her to be able to say that we are far from a working technology and then risk to be deemed a failure. But the risk of her reputation came at the cost of many lives, both directly and indirectly, financially as well as health-related. One of the employees committed suicide after long-time stress, wanting to speak up about all the lies they were forced to tell.
What is the essential difference between Steve Jobs' ability to distort reality and Elisabeth Holms?
Right. So Elisabeth did idolize Jobs. It was to the point that she started, as you mentioned, wearing black turtlenecks, and she wanted Theranos to fly an Apple flag, at half-mast the day that Steve Jobs died. She referred to him as Steve, as if she had been best friends with him. She hired the same ad agency that Apple had used for some of its legendary ad campaigns. When she found out that that ad agency had met with Steve Jobs on Wednesdays, she decreed that she would have her meetings with the agency Chiat Day on Wednesdays. And as you say, she did share this trait, which is like Jobs, she had this ability to sort of put a spell on people with her big blue eyes that blinked rarely, and this deep voice of hers.
Whenever there's a quote-unquote glass ceiling, there's an iron woman right behind it.
And also, the old-fashioned way with the big syringe. Moreover, it only covered a couple of blood tests, and some of the tests didn't agree with the results of conventional machines, which Theranos had to concede in the paper. And then last but not least, to run these various tests, Theranos had to configure the machine differently each time because it still hadn't figured out how to fit all the instruments into one box. So this was a far cry from what she had promised as far back as September of 2013, when she went live with her fingerstick tests in Walgreens stores, first in Palo Alto and then in Arizona.
How did Holmes and her partners, the top-level people, keep this story alive? I mean, this beautiful dream of a kind of home lab where you would be able to, be checking your blood, almost like you're, checking, peeing on a strip or something like that.
Right.
How did they keep that hidden for so long?
Well, there was a culture of fear and intimidation at Theranos going back to its earliest days. Holmes actually sued some ex-employees in 2007. This culture got worse and was really enforced by her boyfriend, a man named Sunnybalwani, who was 19 years her senior, and who's a guy who had made a lot of money during the internet boom. And he joined patients who'd gotten unreliable test results from Theranos. In most cases, luckily, their doctors were suspicious about these results and sent them, to have their blood redrawn and retested elsewhere. One of the stories that I talk about in the book is that of a real estate agent in Phoenix who had ringing in her ear, and so her doctor had sent her to Theranos to get her blood tested via finger stick, and her results came back, and I think 6 values came back abnormal. And the doctor, given the symptom, which was ringing in the ear, became very concerned that she was on the cusp of a stroke, and immediately sent her to the emergency room. The patient spent 4 hours in the hospital and underwent a battery of tests. Finally, the hospital ran her labs again, and they were normal. She then had more tests, MRIs, over the ensuing week until she and her doctor finally came to the conclusion that the Theranos tests had been inaccurate. So that gives you an idea of the health scare that this company put some people through.
Talk a little bit about what happened. Murdoch was an investor in Theranos.
Right.
Simultaneously, owned the newspaper there, controlled the newspaper you were writing for. And there comes a moment where Theranos goes to Murdoch and puts the screws to him. Does Rupert Murdoch, does Sir Murdoch, or Lord Murdoch, acquit himself well?
I mean, I would say that in the end he does. When I started digging into Theranos in early February 2015, he was a month away or 3 weeks away from investing $125 million, which he proceeded to do. I had no idea that he was an investor. He had no idea that I was working on an investigation of the company. And the first I heard a vague rumor that he might be an investor a couple days before we went to print with my first story. Wasn't able to confirm that, and then heard rumors sporadically in the following months and year. Was never able to confirm those rumors. Finally, a year after my first story was published, as I went on book leave to write this book, I was able to confirm with a source that not only was he an investor, but he was the single largest investor. She had had several meetings with him. One at Theranos headquarters in Palo Alto a couple months before my story was published, in which she brought up my story and said that I had gathered a lot of damaging and false information and that it shouldn't be published. She hoped he would kill it. And then again, just 2 weeks in late September, just 2 weeks before we went to press with my story, and that time it was in the News Corp building on the 8th floor where Murdoch had his office, and I was on the 5th floor working on the story, and I had no idea she was in the building.
Where were the regulators in all of this? Because it is a healthcare company, because it's drawing blood, et cetera. There's a vast array of, this isn't the Wild West or anything. Who were the regulators and where were they in all of this?
Well, just like she played the press, she really played regulators. So you have 2 health regulators that are involved in regulating the lab industry. You have the FDA, which reviews and approves the laboratory equipment that laboratories buy and use in their labs. And then you have the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which not many people know aside.
We have some breaking news we want to get to out of California. It concerns the Elisabeth Holms trial. The verdict is in. The disgraced Theranos founder and CEO found guilty on 4 of 11 counts in her landmark Silicon Valley fraud case. The jury reaching a verdict just moments ago after 7 days of deliberations. NBC News senior business reporter Ben Popkin joins us now live. Ben, so break it down for us. It seems here the jury sided with the prosecutors in believing that Elisabeth misled investors when she was running Theranos.
Right. We're looking at a split verdict here, and we are getting 4 counts guilty, 4 counts not guilty, 3 no decision in the Holmes case. When you start to look at the pattern of what she's found guilty, not guilty on, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, only one of those she was found guilty on. Several of the counts where she was accused of defrauding investors, there was no verdict given in 3 of those. That could be a potential mistrial on those counts, which could lay the basis for a further trial on those. But she was found guilty on counts 6, 7, and 8. These were where she was defrauding investors for nearly over $100,000, including a firm connected to former Secretary of Education family office Betsy DeVos. But she was not found guilty on defrauding patients or wire fraud in connection with purchasing advertisements to promote her firm.
Ben, Elisabeth Holmes' defense here was that it wasn't her, it was sort of her underlings, other people connected with Theranos, but she wasn't guilty of these crimes. The jury obviously thought something different. What was the biggest piece of evidence here that sort of turned the case against Elisabeth Holmes? And we should mention each of these counts holds up to 20 years in prison.
One of the most blockbuster pieces of evidence was actually Holmes's words herself. There was a secret phone call, call with investors that was recorded by one of the investors. And that was one of the pieces of evidence that the jury asked in one of their few notes for it to be played. It was her making bold claims, sort of outlandish claims that cannot be supported by the evidence, where she claimed that they were going to be putting Edison's, their Theranos blood testing device, on Medivacs, that they were on track to make over $1 billion, and that they were conducting all the tests on their own equipment, when in fact they were actually outsourcing it and putting it on third-party devices, not telling investors or patients that their real proprietary technology didn't work.
Elisabeth Holmes was convicted of fraud January 2022. Her sentencing trial would be on September 26, 2022. She was found guilty on 4 counts, and each of those counts faces up to 20 years in prison. What is strange is that she decided to become pregnant this year of trial. If this was a scheme to gain sympathy is unknown. Here she is pictured with her husband Billy Evans. Lastly, we will hear from some of the indirect victims.
With more than 60 U.S. patents to his credit, she says, in 2005, Ian was hired as chief scientist at Theranos to work on what the company and founder Elisabeth Holmes promised was revolutionary new blood testing technology. But Rochelle says early on, her husband indicated there were problems.
He started talking to me about all these investments, all the money that the company was bringing in. And he told me that he couldn't imagine why people were giving the company any money, because there was no invention. There was nothing there.
Compounding the problem, she says, was her husband's description of Holmes as someone who couldn't be trusted.
I said, how do you feel about Elisabeth? Do you think she's telling the truth? And he told me, well, Elisabeth lies about everything. That's exactly what he said.
At one point, she says, after her husband raised his concerns with his friend and former Theranos board member and Stanford Emeritus Professor of Chemical Engineering, Channing Robertson, Holmes fired Gibbons. Then the company rehired him a few hours later. But he was demoted, and by early 2013, she says, the stress for Ian had become intolerable, and he was drinking and depressed. Fearing he would be fired if he told the truth about the company's technology in an upcoming court deposition, she says he took an overdose of acetaminophen and died 8 days later at age 67. They'd been married 38 years.
I think of it every day. I mean, I think of it all the time.
Do you believe that if Ian had not gone to work for Theranos, that he would be here?
Oh, yeah, for sure. No question.
After her husband died, she says, she notified Elisabeth Holmes, but she never heard back. The call she did get, she says, from an office manager asking her to return Theranos company property. As for Holmes now,
what does it mean to you that she was convicted?
Well, there's a little bit of satisfaction in knowing she's going to suffer. Because, believe me, I've suffered, and Ian suffered. She has shown no remorse for any of the things she's done to anyone. Nothing.
It was tough. There were a lot of moments when it was really, really tough to keep going, but I am just extremely stubborn, and I knew I was right, and I was not going to lay down and say that I was wrong when I knew with 100% certainty that I was right.
Why do you think that they believed her over you someone who was on site there at the company and could see what was going on. Why do you think people even closest to you did not believe you?
Well, Elisabeth is a very, very charismatic person. When she speaks to you, she makes you feel like you are the most important person in her world in that moment. And she almost has this, reality distortion field around her that people could just get sucked into. Even when I was working with the product every single day, seeing it fail time after time after time, I could go have a 5-minute conversation with Elisabeth and feel like I was saving the world again. It's really a hard phenomenon to explain, but she sucked a lot of people into that.
Yeah, Tyler, that's well expressed. I think our viewers should know that this is not just about investors. There were people who got bad results from this product. A woman who thought she had HIV, another woman who thought she what might be miscarrying a baby. So the stakes were huge for patients as well. From your perspective, from where you're sitting, I'm really curious about the personal side of this. This is your grandfather, George Shultz, a titan of the 20th century, former Secretary of State. Your relationship with him got really rocky. At one point, you were communicating only through lawyers. What kind of cost did you face as an individual, as a grandson, in taking on this fight?
Yeah, that was extremely tough. This whole saga has taken a financial, emotional, and tolls on my relationships. And the toll that I took on my grandfather's relationship was probably the worst. It's tough to explain. I had a few very honest conversations with him. We ultimately did reconcile. He never quite apologized, but he at least admitted that I was right about what I saw, and he congratulated me for doing the right thing. And actually, in one of my last conversations with him, he told me a story about how he got Elisabeth invited during Fleet Week in San Francisco to go give a speech to United States sailors, United States Navy sailors, and he said with tears in her eyes, she told the room about how she was so honored and humbled that her life's work would be saving the lives of United States servicemen and women. And he said he just could not believe that anybody could get in front of these people who are willing to put their lives on the line for our country and lie directly to their face as convincingly as she lied.
Yeah, a lot of people are asking
I feel like him
question,
telling me that story. Yeah.
He's saying, Tyler, you were right. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like him telling me that story was him acknowledging that I was right, and he finally was starting to see through her lies.
Tyler, you are who you are because you're willing to use your voice. And you were on the list of witnesses who would possibly take the stand. Did you want to? And if you did take the stand, what would you have said?
It was kind of nice not having to go testify. I didn't have to prepare. I would have been happy to testify, to get up there and have the opportunity to tell my story under oath. What I would have said, I don't think we have enough time for that, but I would have said that, I could have gone into detail about how the technology didn't work and the various ways the technology didn't work. I would have explained my conversations that I had with my managers, with a vice president, with a CEO, with a board member, with regulators, with journalists. I had to talk to a lot of layers before anything really started happening. And so if I were on the stand, I probably would have gone through all those layers.
Tyler, do you want jail time for Elisabeth Holmes?
Whether Elisabeth Holmes spends time in prison or not doesn't really affect my life. I'm happy that she was found guilty for these crimes, and I feel like I got my vindication from that, and I feel good about that.
How do you make people believe in you?
How do you make people believe in you? I think you have to believe in yourself. And I think you have to have the conviction in yourself to be able to make something happen, because ultimately it's up to you. And when you have that level of conviction, you'll find the people or the resources or the tools that you need to make it happen. It may take a lot longer than you think, but it's about keeping that conviction in yourself.